Oh boy, just when you think it couldn't get any worse for Red Bull, it just did. This has taken a rather interesting turn after what Liam Lawson just said regarding what he knew about Daniel Ricciardo's removal. And also, fun fact, all of this news broke when Australia was asleep. Oh, this makes the whole Oscar Piastri replacing Ricciardo thing look like nothing. Say what you will about Daniel Ricciardo, the racing driver. Maybe he was starting to fall off in his mid-30s, and his time was fast approaching to retire. But Daniel Ricciardo, the person? He was a good guy, and one of the most engaging personalities on the grid, and arguably one of the key people that helped Formula One break out of its stuffy mould and help transform itself into something that now is culturally relevant. Plus, he also seemed like the kind of guy you could have a genuine laugh with or a nice conversation. But no matter which way you look at it, the way that Red Bull have handled this entire affair has been absolutely atrocious. In fact, I don't think there's really much Red Bull can do now to try and fix the situation. Whatever they say now will not be seen as genuine. There'll be skepticism surrounding it. And now, pretty much all of Daniel Ricciardo's fans will be looking to Yuki Tsunoda and say, hey, do Daniel proud! Do him proud, Yuki, please! Seriously, this entire situation has completely undone all of the good PR spin that Christian Horner has manifested since they took in Daniel back from McLaren in 2022, giving him that sanctuary that Zak Brown cruelly took away from him. But now, Zak Brown's come out smelling of roses because at least McLaren gave him notice and gave him a nice little pay packet for it. You remember that, right? When Christian Horner was gladly casting himself as the man offering Ricciardo a home as their third driver. He even came up with this simpering headline that if he were the boss of Alpine, he would hire Daniel, and backed him throughout the last few races that the Australian had with McLaren. It's similar to what Christian did with Checo at the end of 2020. Aston Martin, they were soon to be Racing Point, they were the bad guys for dropping Sergio Perez. Not long after, he bagged their only win, and then Christian comes in, takes Sergio Perez, and they're the good guys. They're just repeating that now by bringing Daniel back in, because McLaren were going through a really bad year, not just on the track, but they were also complicit in a daring coup to secure Oscar Piastri from Alpine. Sure, it's all come good now and it's all wavy gravy, but the fact is though, at the time, Oscar was seen as a villain. But now that entire thing has been cast in a different light, thanks to Liam Lawson's most recent interview to the New Zealand Herald's news talk show, which very much hyped up the deal and reminded people that the country is responsible for the likes of McLaren being a thing. Which, to be fair, is a valid claim, because remember, Bruce McLaren did come from New Zealand and he set up the team. And even though we need to make this clear that Liam Lawson is not the bad guy in this situation and that it's all squarely on the public relations department of both VCARB and Red Bull, Liam Lawson, what he said to the New Zealand Herald really wouldn't have helped matters and probably added fuel to the fire without him even realising it. And the fact that he's probably excited to get a second chance, a second bite at the apple, he might have a bit of a big mouth and probably made it worse for Red Bull. So this is what he said right here. Ahem. It now finally does feel real. Obviously, I knew about it for the last probably 2 weeks. But until it's out there to the world, it obviously doesn't ever feel set in stone. I couldn't tell anybody. It had been the plan for a long time now, where this was where I was leading. Obviously, I had a contract date that needed to be fulfilled, so basically, it was going towards this way, and then a couple of weeks ago, they told me this is what was going to happen. And then basically, not long after that, it was set in stone. Singapore was definitely not an enjoyable weekend for me, just because obviously, we all knew what was coming. At the same time, Daniel has always been very good to me in a lot of ways when I drove last year. Even this season, he's always been somebody that I've never felt in competition with him or anything like that. He never made me feel like that. So it wasn't a nice feeling, but obviously this for me is, I get one shot at F1, and it's come now, and I'm obviously grateful for that opportunity. But now I need to take it with both hands, and at the same time, he said the same thing to me, and he said, you know you need to make the most of it. Let's make one thing clear here. Lawson has done enough to warrant a chance in Formula One, and this is the realization of a boyhood dream which in of itself is perfectly reasonable. This is not his fault, but more like his management being absolutely ruthless with contract negotiations with Red Bull. Lawson's management have got Red Bull over a barrel here. They've almost got no choice but to put Liam in the car, because if they didn't do that, especially for 2025, then they would pretty much lose him, and all of that time and effort and money they sunk into Lawson's development to get him ready to be in a car for the future would have been in vain. Another team would be making the most of it. Again, that's what happened with Alpine and Piastri, and I don't think Red Bull would want that to happen to them. And now, seemingly, it looks like Helmut Marko has managed to get his way and just about claim some sense of power amongst the organisation and Red Bull Racing, even though he's technically not an employee of them. There was a real time, especially a few months ago, that Christian Horner had managed to get the upper hand, and it looked like he was going to completely lock down the team and cement it in his control solely. Now, though, it might be a little bit precarious, and don't worry, I'll be talking more about that later. So now this might be a way for them to evaluate for a second time Yuki and Liam. What for? We don't really know, but one thing we do know is that Red Bull have handled this incredibly poorly, and the sheer confusion which reigned supreme in Singapore was conducted in terrible taste. As we saw, no one was quite sure exactly what was going down. Did Daniel know about this? Did he know nothing? Did he sense something was happening? You could easily say that Sky Sports handled Daniel's departure better than the team did. They gave him a tribute, a sending off, a thank you, and that is really surprising, and it does really tell you how badly the PR departments of those teams were able to control the situation. This is Daniel we're talking about here. Not even VCARB's own team principal knew what was going on, because he said that it may be Daniel's last race, so that means they went for that fastest lap ticket and Daniel succeeded. Can you imagine what would have happened if he'd done that and failed to get the fastest lap? Then all of that would have been in vain, and it would have just been an absolute whimper. And it really didn't help Daniel's case for the fact that VCARB this year have really been lacking when it comes to race strategy, execution. They start off great and then they completely fall down so they can't get any points. And it's not Daniel's fault solely that there haven't been any points. In fact, the last time VCARB scored points was thanks to Daniel at Spa, where he probably thought he'd done enough to get the Red Bull gig. Even Verstappen thought that was going to happen. Also, I can't imagine that it would have been nice to hear about his departure if you live in Australia. They would have woken up to this news because, as one of my patrons Orinx pointed out, this news originally broke in the early hours of Friday morning in Australia, where most people would have been asleep. That kind of makes this look like a very planned maneuver. It really does add to the contempt that many people around the F1 community have toward Red Bull right now. I bet that some classic Red Bull fans are not exactly impressed with the way the team has handled it. And it really just throws into doubt whatever the team says, because Helmut Marko has claimed that, oh, Daniel was made aware of this and the fastest lap thing was a tribute for him. I seriously doubt that him getting the fastest lap would be enough to ease the pain for many Ricciardo fans out there. Sure, his name will go down in the history books as setting the race lap record of Marina Bay, but in the here and now, that's not good enough. And especially when you actually look to the send-off that Sebastian Vettel got a couple of years ago. I reckon, as do many across the internet, that the way that Formula One led up to Abu Dhabi 2022 and the goodbye, all of the messages of Danke Seb, that really set the bar of classic characters in Formula One and how they should be sent off to the ether as well as their future endeavours. I actually can't believe I initially forgot about it when I was talking about this news a few days ago, but yeah, it's absolutely true. Sebastian Vettel got a huge send-off which went on for months, and you could easily argue that Formula One milked this for all that it was worth, but Vettel did appreciate it, I imagine, and it was very deserving because he's a four-time world champion and he was just going off to pastures new. And you then might counter saying, well, Ricciardo shouldn't deserve that because he didn't win any championships. He wasn't even in contention for a championship. Yes, that may be. But then you could counter that with the fact that Ricciardo's impact on Formula One has almost been as significant as what Sebastian had for the sport, especially when it comes to the worldwide media and the way that Daniel Ricciardo has accepted Americana. He is now effectively an American citizen, much like how Bottas now is effectively an Australian citizen with the way he has embraced that country. So all of these messages from VCARB saying thank you to Daniel Ricciardo, wouldn't it have been much better if we got these on Thursday during the media day before the Singapore Grand Prix? Sure, it would have been a crushing blow for Ricciardo fans, but at least there would have been a few days to process the information and for everyone to build up some words of thank you, the graphics department saying thank you, just having a more formulated and surprise party for Ricciardo, just some sort of celebration, but we didn't get that. All we got was confusion, uncertainty. We got a guy who was basically probably told to keep a lid on any backroom talks, who was looking really, really haggard and unsure, who didn't leave the paddock until nearly 2 a.m. just to soak in the F1 experience one last time. This is all great publicity for him in the long run, though, making him look good, and terrible publicity for Red Bull and Lawson. Now once again, don't cast any scorn toward Liam himself here, nor should you blame the admins that were the ones to have pressed upload on the belated tributes on social media, which were greenlit by the superiors. We gotta remember, Liam wasn't the one to tell Red Bull to kick Daniel out. He was just doing the best he could, and all of the evaluations, the tests, it would have been a big stress on him because he probably wasn't sure what was going to be happening. Would Red Bull call his and his management team's bluff and not sign him for 2025 and go, okay Liam, you're on your own, go and find another team? And then probably he might not have found another team, considering that last year when Williams might have considered him for 2024, he turned his nose up at them, saying, I want a seat with Red Bull. And if Red Bull hadn't given it to him, then he would have been down on his luck. But no, it's all come good for him. And also, might I point out, he didn't go up to the F1 camera crew and go, hey, come closer. If Daniel has a mistake, point the camera toward me. And then it will mirror all of the Top Gear stories and adventures and specials with the comedy backup car looming in the background behind Clarkson, Hammond and May. Liam is the comedy backup car, effectively in this scenario. Oh, there goes a chance to get an interview with Formula One again. I actually did get an interview with them once, you know. And based on the messages from the team and the rest of the grid, this seems to be it for Daniel. There doesn't seem to be any vest pocket maneuvers that might lead to him surprisingly resurfacing at Red Bull Racing to replace Checo for 25. This does seem quite final. If this turns out to be actually a bait and switch from Red Bull and that it's actually, surprise, Daniel Ricciardo is going to be partnering Max Verstappen in 2025 after all, then that will have been done in really bad taste. I seriously cannot think of any good scenarios where Red Bull come out smelling of roses after this. Okay, you might be thinking, all right, okay, fine. Daniel, they handle it badly. Well, Liam's in the seat right now. He's gone through the evaluations. He seems to have passed, and now he's going up against Yuki, and then in 2025, he'll get a full season to be compared against him, and then the seat at Red Bull, who knows from there? Well, I've got news for you, and it all comes from Liam as well. And it really is making Red Bull's life even harder. This might be just a trial run, a second trial run. These 6 races in 2024 might be the last ones that Liam gets if he doesn't perform. So he's not even got the seat for 2025. What? According to Liam, this deal he has is not for 2025, but for the last 6 races. And only then will the higher-ups make the call as to who goes where for next season. So what happens if he doesn't perform and Yuki's experience that he's gained with Daniel Ricciardo has actually managed to do enough and he performs much better than the last time he and Lawson were teammates? Okay, I'm going to have to get the firm of doubt out for this one because I'm thinking something here. That maybe this is a clever ruse from Red Bull to not have to worry about Liam's management team's demands about him being used for 2025 or else he can look elsewhere because they'll have given him a second evaluation period. And if he turns out not to have done the business in these 6 races against Yuki, who's now gained more experience, then they'll just say, well, we tried out Liam and he's just not cutting the mustard. Sorry. And it'll also be good for Helmut Marko, because even though he rates Lawson highly, it means now that the ball is back in his court. Now, speaking of Marko, the fact that Daniel lost his seat, and now that there are rumours spreading regarding Perez's future again with the team, that being made public in Mexico, reports speculating that he could announce his retirement there from the sport. All of this gaining momentum, again, because remember this time last year, we were getting rumours from certain sources that Perez was going to announce his retirement at the Mexico Grand Prix in 2023. So take all these rumours with a pinch of salt, because we've been burnt like this before. Could this be a sign that Christian Horner's attempt to wrestle power from Helmut Marko when it comes to driver selections might be failing? Because if this is true and Checo ends up exiting this year as well as Daniel, that'll be Horner's 2 most loyal charges gone. But in all seriousness though, Liam Lawson is one of Marko's top bananas, and with him winning out and getting Liam in the car and not allowing Daniel to see out the season, which to be honest, it doesn't really matter if he saw out the season, because considering how bad VCarb are right now, their upgrades are not really performing, their race strategies are poor, I doubt what Daniel can do can make any difference, so why couldn't he just see out the rest of the season or something like that? It just makes no sense to get rid of him now, because right now it's a real pressure cooker environment there, because Haas and Williams could easily take away P6 and the constructors from them. And it's looking likely that Williams might be able to do it, considering they're on the upwards and Haas are now starting to regroup. And VCarb, they're nowhere. This could be yet another nail in the coffin for Christian, with more and more senior figures of the team that have been around since their very first season of competition heading off for pastures new. For him to lose Daniel and potentially Checo if these rumours pan out, this could be a sign that Helmut Marko and the Austrian side of Red Bull might be getting their way in future discussions be it drivers or anything else. And especially considering that Marko and Verstappen, they're like that. And if these upgrades that they're bringing to Austin do not pan out the way that they hope, Max Verstappen might leave or something like that, or might give up F1 entirely. Who knows? Because at the moment, Red Bull aren't looking all that great, especially when you find out that Marko's basically given up on the constructors due to the fact that Christian Horner made the decision to retain Sergio Perez and give him a 2-year contract extension, thinking that it would boost his morale. Since the summer break ended in Zandvoort and where we are right now, Checo has scored 11 points compared to Max's 54. Oh, and by the way, McLaren, how much have they scored in that same time period? Only 150. So Red Bull have dropped 100 points almost to McLaren. Yeah. And you also get the sense from Horner's Instagram post that he did lose out in his own ideal decision, and that there might have been some kind of sadness behind the text that his dream didn't come true, and the wishes he had back when he took Daniel in from his departure from McLaren failed to materialise. And it's like Daniel said himself, the fairy tale ending didn't happen. Unfortunately, due to all of the backlash that has been manifested toward Red Bull, no one can take anything that they say seriously anymore. It would all seem like PR backpedaling, that they realise that they done goofed, and that anything they say now is to try and plaster up all of the wounds and gaping holes that have been left in their arguments in getting rid of Daniel. So, I'm sorry, Red Bull, I don't think you can really recover from this. You really should have just made all of these announcements 1 week ago and given people time to think about it, and then people would have been sad, but at least people would have had some time to grieve, and Daniel could openly be proud of what he did, instead of just trying to hold back all of the information that he had and just button it. And that way of thinking would have persisted, because for many years now, Christian Horner has not been shy about casting himself as the pantomime villain of F1. He's reportedly said over the years that he doesn't mind being seen as a bad guy, but now at a situation where he wants to be seen as the good guy, it will now come off as disingenuous. I'm sorry, Christian, you can't have it both ways. So how can Red Bull put out any fires that have been spreading? Well, the only way that they can come back from this is if Liam repeats the surprise results that Franco Colapinto has been able to do at Williams, and what Behrman has been able to do for Ferrari and Haas this year. As I touched upon in my video earlier this week about Liam Lawson's Red Bull dream being in doubt, and some people thinking that I meant VCARB, no. I meant in that video that Liam Lawson was probably destined to remain at VCARB and become the next Pierre Gasly, in that he would remain there as the team's leader and benchmark for future rookies, and he would never get the seat next to Max Verstappen unless Max left. But the point is, though, is that in these quotes that I talked about in that video regarding Horner, he was questioning the ability of Lawson, or whether or not he would be good enough compared to the brand new talents of Colapinto, Antonelli, and Behrman. Is he the guy, the savant of Red Bull, to be leading them into the future for the next 10, 15 years or something, even like Lando Norris was in 2019? And now we've got the situation where Christian Horner is bigging up the likes of Arvid Lindblad in F3, now going into F2, and he might be going against Isaac Hadjar, Helmut Marko's lead charge other than Lawson. They're going to be at Campos in F2, the same team, the same benchmark, everything. So everyone's going to be looking at that, especially the Red Bull higher-ups, as to who does better. Does Hadjar do better now that he's got a couple of seasons under his belt? Or will Arvid do better? But we do have to remember that Liam did wonders last year, but we need to see how he does against Franco in particular, since both VCARB and Williams right now, they're quite similar in pace. If Liam can claw some valuable points for the team and help cement their position in the constructors, then okay, fair enough. He'll have done the business. He was able to do what Daniel couldn't. But if he doesn't do that, and he fails to deliver all of the promise that he had last year, and then Yuki wipes the floor with him, just like he wiped the floor with Daniel at the beginning of the year, cementing how much he has learned under the stewardship of both Daniel and Nick De Vries, by the way, because let's remember, Tsunoda highly rated De Vries in terms of his engineering feedback. This could result in Yuki being the superior, and that maybe Daniel's departure might have been in vain. Helmut might have been wrong. And as Lawson pointed out, the decision could be made not to hire him for 2025. And with Red Bull having given him a second stint and by Abu Dhabi a total of 11 races to prove himself, that's a similar amount of races that Nick De Vries got to prove himself at AlphaTauri before they pulled the plug on him. If that does happen, and then Liam Lawson is let go at the end of this year, having not done enough to justify things, which I seriously doubt, because otherwise there might be a little bit of a dearth in terms of talent for Red Bull. I mean, unless the rumours aren't true and Checo does remain next to Max in 2025, then they might plumb for Hadjar over Lawson. Then this might mean that Tsunoda can breathe a sigh of relief, that maybe things might be looking good for him to go up to the senior team after all. That is, unless Christian Horner decides to drop him, since Honda's deal is already coming to an end, much like how he dropped Sainz because they wanted to get rid of Renault back in the day. Because Lawson does admit that there is a lot of pressure on his shoulders in his interview with the New Zealand Herald, that he has to help the team secure their place in the championship. When he was there last year, there was little in terms of expectations for AlphaTauri other than to not be last. And even though Lawson did a really good job stepping in for Daniel Ricciardo when he injured his wrist, and he got some really good points, he wasn't the one who was responsible for getting AlphaTauri off the back where Haas and Alfa Romeo were, and then closer to Williams in 8th place and 7th place, that little battle. Daniel was the one that did that, getting all of those points in Mexico especially, and then Yuki was able to do the business as well at the end in Abu Dhabi. So Ricciardo really did his bit, because let's remember, Mexico last year, he qualified 4th, and he still got some really good points at a time where the team really needed it. So even though Ricciardo, you might be thinking, oh, he's completely washed, when the chips were down last year, he did come good. But hey, I guess maybe Red Bull took the comments that I said about them personally, that I thought they'd gotten soft and that their cutthroat nature in terms of drivers had gone. Well, that cutthroat nature is back, but it was toward the wrong guy. Getting rid of Nick de Vries in the way that they did was bad enough, but to get rid of Daniel Ricciardo, one of the most liked drivers on the grid, no! That was just not the way to do it. Look, okay, Liam, I'm happy for you and I wish you well. You've managed to stay out the course and now you've been given a second chance. Well done. I wish you luck. And I bet that Zak Brown is happy too, because this is all playing into the narrative that he and Andrea Stella have been spinning throughout the entire season. That Red Bull has become dysfunctional, impractical, and is now falling on hard times, whereas McLaren, no. They're the happy family. They're the ones that treat their employees right and give them a good home. They treat their drivers fairly. Okay, they've had their own little wobbles and people have been frustrated, but right now, Oscar and Lando seem relatively at a consensus. Even though there have been some rumblings, they managed to come good. So now, Zak Brown is just rubbing his hands and just going, yeah. Oh, I'm preparing for a backslap if we win the Constructors, and then if so, I'm going to do under Christian and then going, yeah! At the same time, I reckon that in the background, Daniel has been training Yuki Tsunoda up to be the guy to do what he might not have been able to do. Because I think that many of his fans, and even himself, would be thinking that if he didn't get the senior position next to Max, then at least Yuki should get a fair go to see what he could do. Maybe that might have been his glorious purpose after all, which is something I talk more about in this video here that you can go and watch next.